This video is an extended version of a video which I uploaded to another platform. I know for the majority of people it's going to be completely new anyway, but for those of you who did see it on the other platform, it's not an exact repetition, it is somewhat extended. Democracy! We must defend democracy in Ukraine. West leading the way to defend democracy. Ukraine's real-life challenge for democracy. Why democracy matters in the Ukraine crisis. Blinken defends Ukraine's democratic and European path. Ukraine, one of the most corrupt countries in the world, is a symbol of democracy that we must defend. President Zelensky in the election campaign stood on a ticket of non-corruption, and he was very specific about this on the election debate stage. Here he is challenging the then president Petro Poroshenko.
Перший Петро Порошенко каже: "Я бізнес передав сліпий траст", а другий збільшує свої статки за рік 82 рази. Скажіть мені, будь ласка, так може давайте бюджет України передамо в сліпий траст?
My opponent is a hypocrite who hides his money in offshore trusts. Do we want to sell Ukraine out like that? Asks the man who, it turns out, was doing the exact same thing himself, which was revealed via a mega dump of documents revealing the offshore holdings of various elite people around the world, called the Pandora Papers. This from the Organised Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. The documents show that Zelensky and his partners in a television production company, Kvartal 95, set up a network of offshore firms dating back to at least 2012, the year the company began making regular content for TV stations owned by Ihor Kolomoisky, an oligarch dogged by allegations of multi-billion-dollar fraud. So they set up a bunch of offshore companies around 2012 for various nefarious reasons like tax evasion and such like. Then from 2017 these companies were all moved under the so-called nominal ownership of another company for the purpose of hiding the original owners of those companies, hiding their identities. Now you have to keep up here because this thing doesn't get any less complicated. Declaration of Trust. This is the hiding document. Devegra Limited is now the nominal owner of this lot owned by Zelensky and his three buddies. Film Heritage is Zelensky's company. Then yada yada yada, we promise not to do anything without the owners say so. Moltex is a kind of umbrella company housing those other ones, and if we zoom in you can see it's stamped by Devegra, the new hiding company whose director is one Ivan Bakanov. You can just make that out there. His company is now basically hiding Zelensky's offshore holdings. And who is Ivan Bakanov? This is he. Currently he is the head of the security service of Ukraine. He was the head of Kvartal 95 from January 2013 and Kvartal 95 Studio since December 2013. Kvartal 95 is Zelensky's production company, as in the official Ukraine production company and not the various offshore shell companies. And this Ivan Bakanov is one of Zelensky's cronies from his TV production business, whose shell company in Belize provided cover for the Zelensky team's various shell companies. Just to be clear again, this is about hiding money from the motherland, tax evasion and such like. And the Wikipedia entry also says this. The October 2021 Pandora Papers reveal that Bakanov and Zelensky and his chief aide Serhiy Shafir operated a network of offshore companies in the British Virgin Islands, Cyprus and Belize. These companies included some that owned expensive London property, and for your information they were this Desres in Baker Street called Chalfont Court, which actually has the Sherlock Holmes Museum on one side of the road and Regent's Park on the other, one in that road which is nearby, and that one on the right in Westminster called Westminster Palace Gardens. Ironically enough, what clearly captivated the voters' imagination in the election was the fact that Zelensky's TV show was a carbon copy of what they could have if they voted that way, i.e. a Mr. Nobody becomes president. So the prospect of that absolute Cinderella story must have seriously galvanized the voters to voting for him. Here is a scene from one of the episodes.
Квартирку себе купил где-то в Лондоне, тоже, чтобы подальше от холода, подальше от этого всего. и мою. Вот такая загадочная у нас хохлядская душа.
Zelensky's character said, "I'd never buy property in London to get away from the Ukrainians." He wasn't directly buying the property himself. The Regent's Park flat and that one nearby were bought by his closest advisor, and that one was bought by another member of the team. There is nonetheless some irony at play when his syndicate is buying up London property via their shell companies in Belize, and his fictional character says he would never do that.
И мою. Вот такая загадочная у нас хохлядская душа.
It turns out that the Ukrainian soul isn't quite so mysterious after all. It's a little bit more practical. On with the story. The documents also show that just before he was elected, he gifted his stake in a key offshore company, the British Virgin Islands registered Maltex Multi-Capital Corp, to his business partner, soon to be his top presidential aide. So before becoming president, he dumped his offshore interests by taking his share in their umbrella shell company and giving those shares to that one which was his chief aide's company. Just to be clear, this is not now Mr. Bakanov, that security bloke. This is Mr. Shafir, who was his comedy troupe pal and now his chief aide. And those shares were 25,000 shares of no par value, so they didn't have any monetary value attached to them. I suppose the company just acted as a kind of vehicle for managing their offshore interests, so it didn't have any intrinsic value of its own. But he got rid of it all, happily so, in the light of what he was saying around that time.
Перший Петро Порошенко каже, я бізнес передав сліпий траст. Скажіть мені, будь ласка, так може давайте бюджет України передамо в сліпий траст?
I mean, you can't really be saying that while doing it at the same time. However, and in spite of giving up his shares, the documents show that an arrangement was soon made that would allow the offshore to keep paying dividends to a company that now belongs to his wife. The Pandora paper documents do not contain details on the size of any dividend payments or how many may have been made. However, since 2019, Zelensky's wife, Elena Zelenska, has been the sole beneficial owner of Film Heritage, according to the online registry of officials' asset declaration, meaning any subsequent payments would have flowed to her. Gives up his shares at no cost, but carries on receiving income from the company via another company, which sent it back to the original company, which is now owned by his wife. Shell Company A pays income to Volodymyr, but that situation ends and everything passes to Shell Company B. However, Shell Company B carries on paying Shell Company A, which now belongs to this lady, which means that, in reality, this is this, or this. So what was that is still that, with the help of that. You see how shell companies are so good. We must defend European democracy at all costs.
Скажіть мені, будь ласка, так може давайте бюджет України передамо в сліпий траст?
Well, kinda yes. And don't, by the way, forget to stamp out a few channels you don't like. Ukrainian President Zelensky deepens alliance with far right. This is about his relationship with one Serhiy Sternenko, who is a neo-Nazi type who serves American, European and NATO interests by wanting to get away from Russia. In February, Zelensky undemocratically banned the popular pro-Russian television stations ZIK, News 1 and 112 Ukraine, ostensibly to combat Russian disinformation. The channels are affiliated with pro-Russian opposition leader and oligarch Viktor Medvedchuk, who favours a negotiated peace settlement with Moscow and the Donbass separatists. This past week, Zelensky moved even further, banning the stations from YouTube in Ukraine. Zelensky is now also shutting down the opposition. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky suspends parties with Russian links. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has ordered to suspend activities of 11 political parties with links to Russia. The largest of them is the opposition Platform for Life, which has 44 out of 450 seats in the country's parliament. The party is led by Viktor Medvedchuk, who has friendly ties with Russian President Vladimir Putin, who is the godfather of Medvedchuk's daughter. Also on the list is the Ours party led by Yevgeny Murayev. Speaking in a video address early Sunday, Zelensky said that given a large-scale war unleashed by the Russian Federation and links between it and some political structures, the activities of a number of political parties is suspended for the period of the martial law. Well, friendly ties notwithstanding with Putin, Stalin, Hitler, Mao Zedong, Genghis Khan, whoever, these 44 seats were democratically elected. As in democracy. Why democracy matters in the Ukraine crisis. Apparently undemocratically shutting down the democratically elected opposition is consistent with the concept of democracy. Obviously, none of this is anything whatsoever to do with democracy. So here you have a president who is running a bunch of offshore shell companies while promising that he would never do such a thing, and criticizing the former president for operating a bunch of offshore shell companies. And then, when he gets elected, he, on the face of it, gets rid of any interests he has in those offshore shell companies by passing them to the name of his wife, so he's then able to carry on receiving the income from those offshore shell companies. And at the same time, shutting down opposition TV channels and also shutting down the opposition in the name of democracy. I think The Guardian says it best. Welcome to Ukraine, the most corrupt nation in Europe. Here we have a list of Ukrainian people's demands to international community. First is NATO no-fly zone over Ukraine, and last is Ukraine membership in NATO and EU. And in fact, the man of the moment. Zelensky says no-fly zone needed to prevent humanitarian catastrophe. Volodymyr Zelensky said the international community would be responsible for what followed if it did not implement the measure. Definitely, and all in the name of defending democracy. However, President Z and myself do have one surprising thing in common. But of course, there is only one winner.